Hello, thanks for joining me today. I'm showcasing some cards that are inspired by my dog, Luna. She is about a year and a half and she's a Labrador Retriever mix, and I wanted to create some cards that kind of look like her for some of her neighbor dog friends, for mostly for their owners, but for the dogs too. So I have this set from Wildflower for these intertwined pups, and they're primarily designed to sort of open in the front. And I wanted to do something a little bit different with them. I also had this pattern paper that I thought is really holiday festive, and so I wanted to incorporate this when in the cards as well. So my first card design is pretty basic. I'm just using the outline of one of the dogs and one of the sort of accents, which is a bandana, out of the pattern cardstock. And I'm cutting this out of black cardstock because she's a black Labrador. And I just picked one of the pattern papers for the bandana. So I'm going to cut that out of cardstock, and they feature this little flap, so I'm going to cut that off or figure out ways to hide it so it doesn't look so obvious. For the background of this card, I'm using a tone-on-tone plaid stamp to create this sort of plaid background. This is a turnabout stamp, so I've already stamped it a few times, and now this is the last iteration of the turnabout that I'm going to showcase. And then I'll glue all of my pieces together and add a little shiny nose with some glossy accents. So I'm not showing the full creation of this card, mostly because I started with like 1 or 2 ideas, and then I ended up creating 8 different designs, and this video is really long as it is, so I'm not showing every aspect of the video, but just some of the highlights of each different design. So this is the finished card for my first design. I've got that shiny little nose and some happy holidays and some basic glitter cardstock. And then I used sort of the rectangle light colored green to sort of hide that, where that edge is, so it doesn't look so awkward. I also stamped the plaid stamp on the envelope flap, and that sort of completes my first card. In my next card, I'm doing a very similar design, but instead of plaid for the background, I am foiling this geometric snowflakes design. And I'm doing it on light blue cardstock. And so our finished design is very similar, and instead of a glossy accents nose, I'm doing a sort of a glitter clear nose, and instead of the polka dots bandana, it's a little snowflake bandana, although the snowflakes are a little bit hard to see on that light blue cardstock. But otherwise, very similar to my first design. In my next card design, I'm using this random set that I have to create these little Santa hats. I'm only going to end up using one of them, but I'm going to put the little Santa hat on top of the Labrador's head. And in this card, instead of cutting off that edge, I sort of did a partial die cut to get more of a curve in the back, so it wasn't so that part wasn't shown, although I eventually cover it, so I'm not sure that it really mattered, but that was sort of the idea. And here's the finished card. I have the fa la 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 pattern in the background, and I did a little collar out of a different colored background. It's got the Santa hat and then the season's greeting sentiment in gold. And then in my next card, I'm going to be using that snowman hat to create a little hat for the Labrador Retriever. I'll also be using the scarf to create a little scarf. Although this scarf is a little bit too small for the neck of the Labrador, so I'm going to show you how I made it a little bit bigger. So I'm marking on my pattern cardstock with pencil where the width of the neck is, and then I'm lining up and partially die cutting each end on that piece. And then I'm using my scissors to cut the entire length of the scarf. So it's not like a perfect rendition of the original scarf with like the knot and all that that's visible, but it is longer, and it does have those little cute little ends to make it look like a scrunched up scarf. And because we're gonna glue that other piece on top, it's okay that you can't actually see the little knot. And so this is what the final card looks like. I have some pattern paper in the background, and I added these funky little stripes just to give it a little more interest. Although I'm not sure that this looks like a snowman hat. I sometimes look at this and think, oh, it looks kind of like a magician. So I added the little like berries, the holly berries, to sort of help say like, this is for holidays. Okay, and then in my next card, I've done a few windows, so this time I'm creating a window that is the shape of an ornament. And then my dog is going to go inside that ornament shape. To give it some sort of interesting background, I'm going to stamp and heat emboss this pattern in the inside the ornament. So I'm putting down my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm going to stamp this piece. So this is one solid piece, and then there are smaller pieces that will be filled into the center of those, like the empty spaces, so we'll fill that in later. But I'm doing one sort of this full round, and this is clear embossing folder just to give a sort of light on or dark on light effect, and you know, just so that's a little bit of an interesting background without overtaking the rest of the card design. So here I am stamping in the other smaller pieces. And I'll stamp those with my clear embossing ink and then heat emboss that to finish the background. I don't need to fill in all the pieces because some of them will be covered by the Labrador shape, so I left that one piece in the center blank. I'm also going to stamp the Happy Holiday sentiment along a curve, and I used the die cut of the ornament to sort of create this shape. It didn't turn out particularly well, but the idea was that it would look kind of like a collar, and I'm heat embossing this with gold embossing powder. And so my finished card looks like this. So it's got a little bit of the ornament features, and then that Happy Holidays, plus the sort of heat embossed background, and then the pattern paper of the ornaments themselves, I think ties this whole design together really nicely. And in my next design, I am creating a little wreath featuring these poinsettias. So here I am adding the centers with a variety of tiny little circle cardstock pieces of different yellows. And then I'm gonna use the sort of sprigs to form the sort of leaf shape. I like to use that die cut circle frame to help me create the shape, although I don't actually include it in the design. So here I am just filling in some of the spaces with some more foliage to sort of fill it out and make sure that you know, there's a lot of foliage coverage and stuff. And then I'm gonna cut my little Labrador head off sort of at a sort of curved angle so that, you know, it's fully encased by the foliage of the wreath that I'm creating. And then I'll add the little poinsettias around the rim to sort of fill in some of the spaces. And so this is my finished card. It also features a plaid background. And in this one I used a glitter cardstock nose instead of a glossy accent nose. In my last two cards, I'm going to be using this present die set and to create little dogs popping out of presents. So in the first one, it's going to be a red theme using the pattern paper, and then I'm using some dark and lighter color reds to form the bow, which I'm gluing together here. So I'm just gluing all of these different pieces to create the bow. So finishing up the bow here. And then I'm gonna sort of create it sort of like a neck piece. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base that is my normal white cardstock. And I want the top of the dog to be coming up above the card, but I still want it to fit within a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 envelope. So here I'm just trying to get a sense of like how high, and I'm using this panel to help me line it up to make sure that the head of the Labrador will not exceed a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch envelope. So I'm just using my pencil to mark here. And then I am going to cut at that line out of the cardstock. And then what I'll do is I'll cut a the same shape out of the pattern colored cardstock. And I'm going to sandwich the dog between the card base and this patterned cardstock. So I'm going to glue the dog directly onto the card panel, and just making sure again that that is not going to exceed 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card. And then I'm going to glue down the pattern paper on top of the dog. So it looks like the dog is jumping out of, or poking its head out of the present. And so here's the finished card with a little bow. I added a little Happy Holidays tag to finish the card design. So you have some nice space in the middle, in the center to write your message, but it still fits perfectly within a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch envelope. It also stands up really nicely, which I think is really cool, and I just like love the way this card turned out. So I decided to make a second present featuring a dog card. So in this one, I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger. It's still 4 1/4, but the height is going to be 7 inches to fit within an A7 envelope. And so in this one, I'm having the dog, I did the exact same sort of design, putting the pattern paper, sort of the wrapping paper, and using sort of this ribbon. But in this design, I'm having the top of the present be on top of the dog's head. So that's why I had to make the card a little bit longer, and so that I felt like if I made it a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card, it would have been, the card base itself would have been so small, there wouldn't have been a lot of space for a message. It wouldn't really have looked like a present. So that's why I ended up making this card a little bit bigger. So here's my final card. It does fit into an A7 envelope, and it's got the nice little lid, the top, and this card ended up being really top heavy, so I added some cardstock in the middle just to make sure it stood up on its own pretty well, like the other card. Have my shiny nose, and that's the little present. This is what it looks like from the back, so even still a nice kind of back card design. And here are all the finished card designs. I ended up with 8 different designs, although some of them are pretty similar. And I think they all kind of look like her. I mean, I'm biased, but she looks like a Labrador Retriever, and I made them all out of black cardstock, so it looks like her to me. And I'm really excited to hand these out. And just in case you needed some more inspiration, here she is.
Luna! Hi! You're so cute! Yeah, you're so cute!